And now it's time for today's Power to the People expert panel on Right to Zero, how we can transform the way we move goods. During the pandemic, the goods movement industry has grown. While benefiting the economy, the freight industry imposes immense pollution, primarily on low-income communities of color. We're behind in regulating toxic emissions related to ships, trains, trucks, and other cargo. Today's panel focuses on issues around pollution, goods movement, and solutions sought by frontline communities and advocates. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished speakers.
Hi, everybody. My name is Andrea Vidaurre. I am a co-founder and policy lead at the People's Collective for Environmental Justice.
Good afternoon. My name is Thurl Golden. I'm a member of the West Long Beach Association. Within that, I'm also the current treasurer. I've been the vice president and the president previously.
Hey, I'm Athena Motapa, and I work at Earthjustice. At Earthjustice, I fight for equitable transportation policies that put us on a path to a zero emissions future and advance environmental justice.
I'm John G. Miller, MD, FACP, an emergency room doctor, now retired after 46 years of practicing medicine.
Earthjustice is a nonprofit public interest law organization, and our organization works to protect people's health, tackle climate change, and preserve lands and wildlife through the law. Growing up with asthma due to the air quality in Los Angeles, I know firsthand how important it is to protect human health and our planet. And with transportation being the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States and a major source of air pollution in environmental justice communities, I'm working to ensure we have a clean and equitable transportation system.
The People's Collective for Environmental Justice is a community-based organization out of the Inland Empire composed of impacted residents and workers and family members who are living in the Inland Empire and are concerned about the quality of our lives, the health of our economy, and the future of our climate. We were formed because a lot of us are worried about what's happening to our communities in the Inland Empire with the growing freight industry continuing to pollute and endanger our health. So we wanted to create a space where we could all support each other in this fight. A lot of us sometimes feel a little lonely fighting against what seems like a really big, massive problem. So we created this hub for one another to build power together to be able to support each other in fighting for environmental justice.
The West Long Beach Association works to maintain and work for Long Beach as a community to make sure it has the best possible life quality available. We are almost totally at ground zero when it comes from the negative health impacts that are caused by the pollution of the port's daily activities. I have found out through my brief studies of the situation is that there is not a centralized planning department. We are in the middle of a public health crisis, and we have environmental engineers in charge, and I think it's an outrage.
I'm a lifetime fellow of the American College of Emergency Physicians, and before becoming an emergency medicine physician, I was trained as a radiation oncologist, which made me very interested in the causes of cancer. I live in San Pedro, California, in this area that many now refer to as the diesel death zone near the Port of Los Angeles. My concern about diesel exhaust has developed over a number of decades. As I followed the work of the health effects of diesel exhaust air pollution that has been done locally by the scientists at USC and UCLA, and indeed worldwide, I learned that diesel exhaust air pollution is a leading cause or contributor of many of the diseases that I was seeing daily in the emergency department. To name a few: cancer, cardiovascular disease such as heart attacks and strokes, asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and suboptimal permanent lung developmental failure in children. Their lungs don't grow as well as they should, and they carry this deficit into adulthood. And I realized that if I could help get even a few micrograms per cubic meter of diesel exhaust generated fine particle air pollution out of our local air, I would save far more lives than I ever did over decades of treating the victims of diesel exhaust air pollution related illnesses such as asthma, COPD, heart attacks, and strokes. I mean, if I just got the stuff out of the air, maybe I wouldn't have to work so hard.
By the freight industry coming in and building itself out in our literal backyards. The freight industry over the last 2 decades has really defined the way the Inland Empire looks by all of the harms it's been creating. The Inland Empire has shifted in the way that its communities look. Now you can go into a community and not know if it's a residential community or an industrial community, because the freight industry has grown and it's brought in the harms of thousands of diesel trucks on the multiple highways we have, going to rail yards, warehouses, airports, and bringing in tons and tons of pollution and greenhouse gases. Those harms look like our community suffering from higher levels of asthma, higher levels of respiratory diseases, and cancers. It's also looked like not having economic mobility, being stuck in an industry that keeps its workers with low wages and unsafe working conditions. It also looks like it limits the opportunities we have in our community to be able to grow up having full, thriving lives.
Those negative health impacts have West Long Beach with a 14% higher childhood asthma rate. It has an elevated respiratory incidence, respiratory disease and sickness than any other where in the county. The health industry, I mean, not the health industry, but the goods movement industry is part of we say it's an international transportation, part of international transportation. And local governments tend to use these as excuses to solve problems instead of opportunities to do good. That's the best way I could put it. I mentioned earlier about the Coastal Act of California. And the ports are in the coastal district. They are protected by the Coastal Act, but there seems to be no one who has oversight because of that. The Coastal Act requires the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach to operate efficiently as possible to keep from building additional ports. That was done at a time when the population of California was approximately a third of what it is today. That has to be adjusted to meet the conditions of today. Population in California and the world are going to continue to rise. California and Los Angeles ports are the gateway to almost 50% of all goods that come into California, come into the United States, excuse me. With that, they have a new impact, a different impact, a much larger impact than they've ever had. And they have not been able to meet the minimum standards for clean air. That's just a fact. There is currently what they have a clean air program that they're trying to set goals to meet by 2030, 2035, and they have had 3 others, and this is the latest in that group, and they have not met the goals of any. There's always been, we just can't do it. My belief and my thinking is that California is going to have to add more capacity. This past weekend, there was over 100 ships waiting to come in to be unloaded. All pollutants, because all the ships that were out there were diesel ships. And over 90% of all freight ships that go back and forth across the ocean coming here are diesel ships. but yet and still the ports say that, well, we don't have the ability to regulate them. But yet and still, when I travel down the interstate, I can see a motel with a sign says no vacancies. And I'm using that as a point. If you're all filled up, you have to go someplace else. You can't just sit here and belch out these fumes, this disease, this killing gas on the residents, on the citizens of the United States of America. With impunity, you cannot do it. You should not be able to do it. It is totally something that's unreasonable for me to comprehend that somebody would even attempt to do that. But yet and still, it happens every day right here.
I've witnessed firsthand the effects of the freight industry. I mean, first of all, our roads are clogged with trucks day and night spewing out diesel exhaust, and at times the smell is overwhelming. But really, for years, as I was driving to work over the bridge between Port of Long Beach and Port of LA, if I could see that the air was smoggy, I knew that I would be seeing lots of severe asthma and COPD exacerbations and more cardiovascular problems than usual in the ER where I was going to work. You see the bad looking smog, you feel it in your throat, you go to work and the ER is clogged with people with asthma attacks and COPD exacerbations and a whole host of things. But really, on a broader, maybe more philosophical scale, the scientists at our local medical schools and worldwide have identified fine particle and other toxic constituents of freight industry diesel exhaust emissions as major drivers of the health problems I just mentioned. Thus, I know that on a statistical basis, a significant fraction of the cases I was seeing wouldn't have happened if the patient had not had a chronic exposure to these pollutants. You may not be able to say that a given individual case was due to the air pollution, although people coming in with asthma say the air is nasty and it's making my asthma horrible. But anyway, on aggregate, many cases are due to it, and the scientists have shown this clearly. This may be an abstract way to see it by a bit, but for me, it's very powerful. The term diesel death zone accurately describes the situation in the area where I live and downwind of the twin ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. The term diesel death zone just popped into my head while a reporter was asking me to describe our situation here near the ports. I saw in my head a chart that was from a study done in 1998 that showed high risk of death from air pollution, diesel exhaust air pollution, study known as MATES 2. And these dark areas are right where we live, right around the ports. And as I saw that chart in my mind, I thought, we are living in a diesel death zone. That's what I told the reporter. He wrote it in the newspaper. I think he actually headed his article with something like that. We're living in a diesel death zone. Here's why. And it just caught on because people instinctively knew that described our situation in a very few words.
The port is like your neighbor with a big dog. Every afternoon, he walks his dog, and his dog drops a big load in the middle of your front lawn. You go out there and say, hey, man, you got to clean this up. Oh, don't worry about it. Nobody can tell me what to do. That's how the port acts. They put in all these fumes, all this pollution, all the extracts from the engines into our air and are refusing to clean it up. That's outrageous. Totally outrageous. The entire political system in Southern California is failing the people of Southern California because they are more interested in running newspaper clips talking about we have moved more cargo through the ports than any time in history. What about the ad that says you created more pollution and have injured more people than any time in history? There's a cost for it. People's lives, people's in these communities in and around the ports are suffering every day and having the cargo come in on the blood of their blacks.
I think that our groups claim success every day when we continue to build relationships and friendships and power within one another in our communities, both locally and with other communities across the state and across the country. I think those are the times that we claim success. But I think we will claim success against the fossil fuel industry and the freight industry when we don't see our rights continue to be infringed on. I think we'll be able to when our communities are able to decide for themselves when a project should not go in, when combustion shouldn't be used anymore, when a system of transferring goods is done equitably so that the communities who shop the least aren't the ones paying the biggest burden for everybody to be able to benefit from.
The solutions we're seeing discussed to solve the freight pollution crisis is the transition of medium and heavy duty fleets to zero emission vehicles. And to support the transition, advocates are pushing for freight electrification at ports, freight vehicles and equipment, as well as electric vehicle charging infrastructure through grants, rebates, and improved tax credits.
The gas industry is fighting electrification, and we see that on the ground by them asking for subsidies from the state for their products, lobbying against electrification efforts and other electrification policies throughout the state. And we know that it's to push their product and not for the real benefit of environmental justice. Our communities have called out many times that another fossil fuel industry as a solution just will continue to exacerbate the environmental racism that is here, because no matter if it's the extraction, the transport, or the refueling, those sites happen in our same communities, and we do not accept going from one fossil fuel to another when we don't even know the full impacts that natural gas can have on our health. Groups coming together to push back against this is everybody from impacted residents to impacted workers to church groups to environmental groups to even labor groups. All of us knowing that we need a higher standard here in our communities. We need a higher standard of work, and we need a higher standard of the way that they're allowed to pollute in our communities. All of us coming together knowing, because no matter whether we're a community member or worker, we all live in the same community, and we need to come together to make sure that our health doesn't continue to be infringed on.
Your mitigation plan, your overall clean air action plan, the things that the AQMD are supposedly doing, they are not working because people are dying. The litmus test here is people are dying at a greater number in this area of Los Angeles County than any place in Los Angeles County. In Los Angeles County in particular, from my perspective, is spending more time trying to spin the sunshine than do the right thing. Nobody is penalizing them for doing what they're doing, but it's the way they carry out their daily activities is the cause. Therefore, the effect is death on this community, sickness, childhood asthma, children being sick all their life. When you have it in childhood, you keep it all your life, a lifetime of suffering, and they have no remorse. I was at a meeting a couple weeks ago, matter of fact, with one of the harbor commissioners. And I told him I don't see no empathy from that commission. Well, I object to it. Well, that's fine, but people are still dying. You objecting and people are dying. I can't grasp that type of thinking. But these are the decision makers. This is what we have to deal with. This is why I'm 100% for zero emissions, because it's going to cut a large chunk of this mayhem they're putting on the people of this community.
Well, the solutions I think we must demand from the freight and logistics industry are twofold. First, they've got to stop polluting the air for profit that they've been doing, and this may mean changing to less polluting equipment, such as electric trucks and zero emission equipment, and perhaps different operating procedures and whole bunch of things like that. But secondly, aside from stopping doing what they're doing, they need to pay for the damage they've already caused. They've made billions by knowingly polluting the air in search of profits by externalizing the healthcare costs in terms of lives lost and increased costs by putting their pollution in the air, and they put this on the backs of the people while they make their money. It's an environmental justice issue. It affects it affects millions of people. But I suspect that they won't just cough up the money to pay for this damage out of the goodness of their hearts. I suspect this will have to happen through class action lawsuits.
To advance the zero emissions future, I recommend reaching out to your local, state, and federal officials and letting them know that you care about this issue. Whether it's through a letter, an email, or a phone call, elected officials pay attention to their constituents and how these issues affect them directly so they can put a name and a face to an issue.
Thanks everybody for watching this panel today. If there's one thing you take from this today, is that we need to continue taking personal action while at the same time challenging our systems and pushing for systemic change. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Visit earthjustice.org for more scheduled panels and in-depth expert discussions during Climate Week. We are Earth Justice, wielding the power of law and the strength of partnership to protect people's health, to preserve magnificent places and wildlife, to advance clean energy, and to combat climate change. We're here because the Earth needs a good lawyer. Earth Justice. Learn more at earthjustice.org/02100 and take action by texting climate to 43428.